Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Finding Me in the ITV networks. With me today, a very special, beautiful, charming, dynamic and very warm young lady, Amy Gilliam. Amy is a junior research assistant at the Study for Governance Innovation. She completed her honours in international relations and political science at the University of Pretoria, and she obtained a degree with a distinction. And while doing her degree, she was encouraged to participate in very many social activities. She got involved in developmental organizations, and of course this reinforced her passion and interest in the subject of development. Amy's research interests include development in the 21st century and models of development for developing countries. So considering the whole focus on development, on reaching out to people, on being actively involved with people, I felt it was a perfect opportunity to engage this young lady so that she can be perhaps a role model and also stimulate and encourage very many other young people who are today far more interested in other things rather than focusing on development and the development of others. So with that, I'd like to say welcome and thank you for being here, Amy.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for being such an inspiration to the young people and to older people as well.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's just, I guess it's my passion, so it's something I just try to pursue.
You know, Amy, your focus on activism is, of course, unique, and not only unique, but it's encouraging for young people today in a climate, in a society, and perhaps even in a country where people are more, content on sitting back, on being couch potatoes or couch critics or armchair critics, as I usually call them. Very few are willing to actually get their hands dirty, to get up, go there and do something. So is this approach necessary for young people, and especially in getting involved in activism?
I would definitely say so. I mean, we are confronted with so many social, political, and environmental issues at the moment, and I think there's definitely room for students to get involved. Students, I mean anyone in society, civil society, to participate in these organizations. And I think particularly the youth, since they are the future of our country, of the world, they need to be aware and conscious of these issues and need to actively participate in facilitating change as well as coming up with the solutions to many of these challenges.
Do you think the youth can offer such perhaps solutions? Can they facilitate? Do they have the potential to contribute positively?
I would definitely say so. I mean, I think when you do see youth come together based on the organizations I was a part of, there's sort of a creativity that they bring, and sometimes a bit of optimism. And I think that definitely leads to very unique solutions. And I think there's always room for you to learn along the way. But I definitely think they have a role to play.
So it's about tapping into your inner self and also being confident enough to step forward and say, yes, perhaps I can make a difference.
Definitely. I think it's just finding the role that you can play and how to play that role.
Now, you speak about development, and you said that you got involved in subjects and organizations that were all related to development. It's a very important question, and I think it's pertinent in the sense that there is this shift between the global north and the global south, and there's different ways of looking at things. But in your opinion, what does development mean to you?
I think that is definitely a very difficult question. It is something I'm still trying to figure out for myself. But for right now, what development means to me is focusing on, enhancing the capabilities and potentials of individuals. I think that should be a focal point of development, as well as ensuring that development is fair and equitable at the same time. On the flip side, I do think that it should also be about, respecting, learning to respect and live within the confines of nature, protecting and preserving our nature and the environment in which we live. So I think there should be ultimately more of a balance between the economic, social, and environmental dimensions of development, whereas currently we see this is skewed in favor of the economic growth.
And as you're speaking, I see there's a strong emphasis on development in terms of nature, and I'm going to come to that a little later because I know you're very passionate about the environment. But I was also thinking about San's concept of development as freedom. You know, how do you relate that in terms of your worldview?
I would say it's a fundamental part. I think we as humans have so much potential. I think every person has potential that should be tapped into. So I think, you know, that should serve as an end goal, you know, enhancing the capabilities and potentials of individuals, because I think ultimately the social aspect of development is really what makes humans happy. You know, realizing their capabilities or their potentials and putting those to use is often what gives people purpose and meaning in their lives.
And talking about purpose and meaning now, let's come to that. Do you think in terms of purpose and meaning there is a responsibility on each individual to positively contribute and to move away from this, you know, liberal identity of everything just for myself and the selfish goal, focusing on the self, move away from that more towards a social community or civic participation?
I think it's a very difficult question. People have such different views on it, but personally, I would say so. I think it is important to take ownership of that responsibility. And I think in order for you to want to affect change or, you know, to see a difference in your, whether it be in your own country or communities, you need to be a part of that change and you need to be involved. So I don't think you can afford to criticize and complain about the issues when you yourself are not always involved in creating change.
Or not taking responsibility or also contributing towards that change. So you are passionate about people, you're passionate about empowerment, and I think this is a wonderful passion which certainly needs to be channeled and harnessed. So And of course, for me, it's refreshing because so many young people are only concerned with material satisfaction today. So what drove this passion, or what directed it? What channeled you towards this whole concept of development and empowerment and about being in touch with people?
I think it's been sort of a long journey to get to this sort of point. But for me, it really started in high school, where I acknowledged the fact that I was extremely privileged to have an overseas education. And I think during that period, you know, I wasn't sure about what I wanted to do. And once I realized that privilege I had, and I recognized the growing issues we had in South Africa, I did feel a sense of responsibility and, you know, want to come back here and give back and to find a path, a career path, whatever it may be, that would lead me to helping others and to giving back some of the skills and knowledge that I may have learned along the way.
You know, I was listening to the radio this morning, and John Robbie was talking about creativity and bringing in passion, etc., into the workspace or in towards leadership. You know, and somebody called in one of the CEOs or a top senior management from, I think, one of the banks, and she said that initially they used to give bursaries, etc., to people only in economics and sciences, etc., but now they're including people from the humanities because they understand that towards contributing towards positive leadership, you need creativity too. And I think that a lot of it comes comes from the humanities. So you would agree with that?
Definitely. I think, you know, there's a lot of validity in focusing on the natural sciences and economics. But I do think at the same time, what humanities gives you is a certain view of the world and the ability to analyze what is around you.
To be more holistic and critical too, I suppose.
Exactly. And also appreciate society and see where the challenges are.
Yeah, definitely. So we spoke about your passion for people and empowerment, and you speak about helping and empowering others. Do you think that getting involved in this particular area, is this a life approach?
Definitely, without a doubt. For me, it's my passion. It's what informs most of my decisions about where I want to go or what I want to do. And yeah, it gives me meaning, so it pushes me to work hard in order to get somewhere where I can, you know, actively every single day be making a change in South Africa or in communities.
But involved in something that requires you to make a change or maybe to assist others, do you think there will be personal sacrifices? Would you have to give up certain things? Would you have to put yourself on the back burner for a while, perhaps?
Definitely. I think there's always sacrifices, with whatever path we do choose. And sometimes those can be personal sacrifices. But I think with this career path, maybe the biggest sacrifice would be material sacrifice, not earning as big a salary.
If you're in the corporate world, for
Yes,
example,
exactly.
now you're going to go into an NGO or to some form of organization
Yes.
or something like that.
Yeah.
Hands-on, what would you love to do?
I think community development projects, if there was a project that was geared towards uplifting communities, but in a holistic sense, that not only focused on, creating jobs, but focused on the social aspects, the environmental aspects, as well as the economic aspects, to create communities that are really sustainable and self-reliant.
Okay, so we're going to take this conversation a little further, but we have to go to a break, so we'll see you after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the second segment of Finding Me in the ITV networks today with my very charming young guest, and that is Amy Gilliam, who is a junior research assistant at the Center for the Study of Governance Innovation. Amy is, as you heard in the previous segment, very interested in empowerment, getting involved with people in social activism, and of course in the upliftment of people and communities. And she has adopted this approach after realizing how privileged she is. And I think that's, for me, Amy, that's an important starting point, because many people don't realize the privilege they have.
Definitely.
And I'm coming from an Islamic viewpoint. There is an ayah, there's a verse in the Quran where Allah says, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, la in shakartum la azidannakum," that if you show gratitude, I will increase you. And part of showing gratitude is to recognize what you have and to recognize the blessings that you have, isn't it?
Without a doubt.
And I suppose when you realize those blessings and you feel, I'd like to share, or I would like to make a difference. But before I come to my other question, you were speaking about your education, and you said it's overseas education. Okay, so you've been there, you've come here now. What is the difference? Why do you think it's a privilege to have an overseas education as compared to South African education?
I would say just in terms of the education I received at those particular high schools, opened my mind up in specifically the high school in Munich. It opened up my mind in a completely different way in terms of how I analyze things. I hadn't been exposed to that way of thinking previously.
So the structure of the school, the high school education, perhaps the curricula that you engage with, is it critical? Does it encourage free independent thought, or is it just a whole lot of information pushed down your throat? You must memorize it and learn it according, is repeated, regurgitated exactly as it is in order to do well, or is that a completely different focus?
I think specifically at the one in Munich, there was definitely a lot of emphasis placed on this critical engagement with the work, and so you were able to form your own opinions about the material. And it was something that actually used to make me very nervous when I first arrived there, because now I had to have an opinion on every historical event that we discussed in class, and I would have to come up with why I came to that conclusion.
So you had to justify your opinion.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so it was very challenging, but at the same time, after those 2 years, the results was fantastic, just to be able to think for yourself about certain issues. And I think that definitely pushed me in the direction that I am in today.
So talking about this high school education that leads to creative development and of course critical thought, I think if more young people start inputting, then perhaps the future generations will also get an opportunity to be exposed to this in the South African context. And part of this critical development probably informed your desire to get involved, because you've written extensively about informal settlements. Now, informal settlements is like, for young people, many just walk past it to look at it, others turn their nose up when there's a bad stench, etc., or complain that there's a criminal element. But you thought about looking deeper into an informal settlement. What made you investigate this particular topic?
Well, I think it sort of started off in one of my classes where, it was one of the topics we could select, but it didn't necessarily confine the topic to South Africa.
Okay.
And I decided I wanted to look at informal settlements specifically in the context of South Africa and really try to understand what the challenges were and the consequences of these informal settlements.
And then from this, what were your most pertinent findings from this particular analysis?
I think the biggest thing when it came to looking at informal settlements was sort of understanding or realizing how complex a phenomenon they are. And I think one of the biggest things is, well, firstly, to realize that they are actually still a result of the apartheid era. They can be traced back, many of the processes can be traced back to the apartheid era. And, when we transitioned to democracy, you saw this rapid urbanization where informal settlements expanded and increased at the same time. And we actually had 300 in 1994, and in 2011 we had 2,700.
Sure, informal settlements.
Yes.
Okay, but considering that there is such an upscale of informal settlements, is the government taking responsibility for this from what you've looked at? And are they acknowledging that there exists, that we need to do something? Or is there still this mentality that these are illegal land grab situations or illegal, lodging on land that doesn't belong to them, and so the state basically turns a blind eye and pretends that these people don't exist?
Well, I think that was actually one of the biggest findings in my paper, was that the response by the post-apartheid government has been very ambiguous, inconsistent, and at times very harsh towards informal settlements. And actually, when you investigate what their approach has been to informal settlements, you see that there has been simultaneously two contradictory approaches implemented. So the first is the direct approach, which basically there was a change in the political rhetoric, which began to focus on the eradication of informal settlements.
Oh, okay.
And they started to focus on, the use of force to prevent, control informal settlements from actually forming to begin with, and then to evict, relocate these informal settlements. So as you've mentioned, that falls under, this approach, how they've neglected these people, their rights, and often looked at them in a very negative light. The second approach was the indirect one that actually addressed the underlying causes. Namely the accessibility to land, provision of housing and access to services. And so with this indirect approach, it focused on upgrading land that was suitable for human settlements, as well as providing well-located land when they could. So this one more directly, addressed the underlying causes of informal settlements, and in many senses is far more sustainable.
Of course, because now you're addressing the direct needs of the people.
Definitely.
So considering that, of course, having an informal settlement, if it's just sporadically set up, etc., it has an impact on the environment. And I know that you're very passionate about the environment also. So which organizations do you engage with, and why have you chosen these specific organizations?
Well, one that I have directly been involved with is Greenpeace, and mostly because they were one of the organizations that actually got back to us and, made contact with us to invite us to their volunteer meetings. So that was a big factor. There were a number that I had contacted, but, the response sometimes is often low.
So is there a local chapter of Greenpeace here in Pretoria?
In Johannesburg, actually.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
So I've been involved in a number of their meetings and their permaculture courses, and I've learned a lot from them, but at the same time I still follow up with many of these other green organizations, specifically Green Pop in the Western Cape and Sustainable Brothers.
What is Green Pop?
Green Pop is basically an organization that seeks to reconnect people with nature by planting trees.
Okay,
and they
wonderful.
see planting trees as a way as having positive social, environmental and economic effects for communities.
And Sustainable Brothers?
Sustainable Brothers is an organization based in Stellenbosch.
Right.
And it's a bunch of boys that came from Stellenbosch University. They bought a piece of land and have used permaculture, design and ethics and principles to basically create a sustainable garden, food garden.
And does that go back into the community then?
Yes, and they teach and educate a lot of people about these principles.
So do you find that, looking at the way in which environment impacts on your life, and considering that South Africans have come through an apartheid transition period, which was of course very destructive, especially in the way in which people were relocated to certain areas, confined to spaces, etc. Do you find that now, post 1994, post the apartheid era, the South Africans are environmentally aware, or is there a problem with this awareness?
I would say yes and no. To a certain extent, there are definitely individuals who are passionate about the environment and about getting out there and creating change and creating awareness. These organizations that are working with civil society on the ground and really affecting change. And at the same time, there are definitely people who are passionate about the environment and preserving it, but at the same time are unable to do so because, or to be actively involved because of, transportation costs here, using public transportation, as well as shifting
access to resources,
resources, as well as, having renewable energy for your house instead of using electricity. So I think those are definitely factors to take into consideration.
Now, you recently got involved in a workshop where you presented on transition towns, and I'm very interested in this particular concept. So what are transition towns and how did the concept originate?
So transition towns are basically locally driven initiatives that seek to not only meet, social, environmental and economic challenges resulting from climate change, but it also seeks to create communities that, are more self-reliant and are able to cater for themselves. And
So in South Africa, for example, where do we have these communities? Where do we have these transition towns?
You can find them specifically, one of the most established ones is in Greyton. Then there's one in Hout Bay, Nelson Mandela Metropolitan Bay, as well as Prince Albert. And yes, Greyton is definitely the most established.
Taken the initiative to develop these transition towns? Is it the municipality? Is it local NGOs, or what? How does it occur?
I think it would be the local NGOs as well as civil society within these different towns. So it's definitely locally driven, and they've in fact declared themselves transition towns. Yeah.
So give me one or two features of a transition town.
So one is to the production and consumption of local produce, as well as setting up energy companies, so renewable energy companies.
Wow, they set it up themselves?
Yes.
So they're not taking off the Eskom grid or whatever?
No.
Wow.
For instance, that's a central part of the Greyton transition town. They've got an energy company and they use that to power the town itself.
But is it more expensive, or?
I think initially it would be. I mean, there's no specific costs, on their website, so you can't see how much it would cost initially. But I do think at the moment, unfortunately, this sort of a transition is, to a certain extent, elitist. It is very expensive and takes a lot of time and effort.
I suppose we have to consider cost-benefit, and in the long run, it's about benefit. Yes, it's about benefit. We're coming very close to the end, so I have a very important question, and now we'll come to the profound questions. What does social justice mean to you?
I think social justice to me is about equality, being fair, respect, and ultimately I think addressing any of these injustices, whether those are social, political, economic or environmental, addressing these injustices and at the same time valuing diversity. Do
you think part of social justice would also incorporate that people acknowledge perhaps guilt if they've done something wrong, acknowledge that they need to take blame for what has happened, etc.?
Yeah. Without a doubt, I think that would be a fundamental component of it.
So, do you believe that South Africa has begun to overcome its deeply ingrained apartheid legacy, or are you of the opinion that changes are still at this stage still very cosmetic?
I think they are still cosmetic. I mean, yes, to a certain extent, there are some sort of changes. You know, we do have a rising black middle class and upper class, and, you know, we do see more social interaction across racial lines. But at the same time, you see that the economy as well as poverty is still based along racial lines. And when you look at urban areas, the spatial layout and divide is very much based along racial lines still. And all of this we have inherited from apartheid. So
yeah, I know I might sound hypercritical, but sometimes I get frustrated too when I drive.
Definitely.
And I see them planting the new jacaranda trees here as I come up past the Brooklyn Circle. And I say, they're beautifying an area that's already beautiful. They upgrade a place that's already well kept, you know. These kind of things are reinforced, and yet there's so many areas in South Africa that actually need maintenance and uplifting.
Definitely attention,
Yes,
as well as
of course.
integration.
And not only that, improving areas for children, if you consider children.
Definitely.
So we're right at the end, and I want you to leave us with perhaps your favorite saying or your favorite quote, and then a parting message to the audience, especially the younger people.
I would say one of my favorite quotes, or the quote that I have up on the wall, see every day at home, is the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. And I think my parting message would be, as cliche as it may sound, you know, as Mahatma Gandhi said, to, you know, be the change that you wish to see in the world, and to really follow your passions and your dreams, and to give back, because I think that ultimately gives you meaning and will allow you to achieve success in your life.
Thanks a million for that, Amy.
Thank you very much.
And I think I'd like to conclude just on that and say the saying of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he said, the best of you are he who's best to mankind. So fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, until we meet again.